the social fact bit and done. Let's go further and see for ourselves. So we have now suicide, right? Okay. There are two questions in the past 10-11 years. Discuss distinct sociological method adopted by Durkheim in his method of suicide, and the other is explain Durkheim's basic arguments on suicide. Can you analyze high suicide rates of contemporary Indian society with Durkheim's theory? It's an interesting set of questions. Now, suicide is again 1897, and this is Durkheim's work, third important work, 1897. Now, you can always write that Durkheim started looking into the problem of suicide a bit earlier. So this was 1888, so approximately 9 years before the book came out. And 1888, he was working on an article, and it was titled Suicide and the Birth Rate. So while working on that article, he started reading on suicide and gradually, of course, got very excited, interested. And then 1897, you have a full-fledged book, which is his third sociological work. Now, what Durkheim does is he studies. So this is basically a textual study. And he studies the town hall records, whichever record he can get his hands on, he studies those. So for this particular work, he studies as many as 26,000 records of 26,000 suicides. And why did he basically, write this particular book? So he did not write this book so that people could understand suicide better. He essentially wrote this book to help people understand sociological method. So in suicide, in rules of sociological method, he talks about it. In suicide, he applies the sociological method and helps us understand how a sociological study is to be carried out in relation to an act that is pretty much by everyone considered as an individual act. So he wanted to prove the power of the new science of sociology, the power of this new discipline that had come to the fore. So Durkheim, as a proponent of sociology, wanted to put in place a case for a certain kind of a sociological method. So he was not interested in why any specific individual committed suicide. That is something that he thought, well, psychologists can do, and he left it for the psychologists. But he was interested in differences in suicide rates. So he was interested in figuring out why one group had a higher rate and another group did not have a higher rate, something like that. Married, unmarried, Catholic, Protestant, elderly, not so elderly, and so on and so forth. So he does not want to get into the psychological, biological factors. He wants to bring in the sociological factors. So it is here that he brings in this famous distinction that I drew your attention to, the distinction between what he calls the incidence of suicide, which is to do with individual fact, psychological fact, and the rate of suicide, which is to do with social fact, right? Which is to do with the society, the collective, and so on. So this is where Durkheim is bringing about a very important shift from a psychological theory of suicide to a sociological theory of suicide. Now, you have the four suicides, I'm sure you are aware of, the integrative pole and the regulative pole. In the integrative, you have you have altruistic and egoistic. In the regulative, you have anomic and fatalistic or militaristic, and so on. So this will be all. I don't think you have anything else. Can you analyze high suicide rates of contemporary Indian society? Now, of course, in relation to high suicide rates, now in India, of course, you have suicide rates in relation to, unfortunately, various segments. So you have farmer suicides, you have suicide committed by young students who fail in their exams or who are not able to qualify a particular competitive examination. So you have suicide rates. You have a few cases of suicides wherein people have no other option but to call it quits, but to pull the trigger because they are under massive debt, etc. So you have some of the cases wherein you straight away borrow from the Durkheimian idea of, let's say, anomic suicide, For example, if a businessman, a family, etc., they lose out everything. And there are many cases during recession, during crash, you have these cases wherein people just simply commit suicide, and not just people, but with their families. They just, the entire family, either willfully or forcibly, some of the members, they commit suicide or they are found dead. Then in the case of farmer suicides, you could think about farmer suicide from two particular vantage points. One is, of course, anomic, in the sense that they just don't see any meaning. There is hardly any meaning left, and things just seem so very much all over the place that there's no way in which they can bring a certain order back into their lives. So that could be one. The other is, which is a possibility, that suicide could be considered as some sort of, I would say, that the person is so much, the person feels so disconnected from the society because of a series of experiences. So one could give the example of egoistic suicide as well. That the person, there could also be instances that the suicide actually is done so that there could be a compensation. So, for example, again, a satirical take, PP Life, the film that was made many years ago, actually look into the question of farmer suicide from this absolutely satirical, very tragic, comic sort of way, wherein the farmer is all set to commit suicide because it is only after committing suicide that the family is going to get a certain compensation amount. And that compensation amount, according to the farmer, perhaps will bail him out, or sorry, will bail his family out of the debt. So these are some of the pointers that you can always keep in mind.